I still remember the weight of that loss when I was 5, the emptiness that followed my mother's passing. That age, I barely understood death, but I knew what her absence felt like. It was in the silence of the house and the way my father's hands lingered on the back of his chair at dinner, as if waiting for her to sit beside him. My father, at just 23, suddenly became my entire world. He was young, strong, and determined. While others might have faltered under the weight of grief and responsibility, he rose every day, tirelessly shaping a life for us. I admired him even before I knew what that word truly meant. He worked long hours at the factory, his hands calloused and his smile tired when he came home. Yet he always found the energy to kneel beside my bed, his voice soft and warm as he read me bedtime stories. It was in those moments that I felt most safe. I loved the sound of his laughter, rare as it was, and the crinkle around his eyes when he looked at me like I was his everything. And I was. Now 17, I am on the cusp of adulthood, and the world feels vast and unknown. My 18th birthday is just a week away, but the future looms large and daunting. As I glance at my father across the living room, his dark hair flecked with gray, his face lined with years of sacrifice, I wonder how he feels about the years slipping by. I am his daughter, but for so long I've been more than that, a partner in a quiet, unwavering bond born of shared grief and survival. In many ways, my birthday feels like a threshold, not just for me but for both of us. It's as if the world is waiting to test the strength of the cocoon we've built together, one that has sheltered us from so much. The morning of my 18th birthday was unlike any other. The smell of something sweet and warm wafted into my room, pulling me from sleep. I stretched, rubbing my eyes, and for a moment I forgot the day's significance. Then I saw the soft light of morning filtering through my window and realized, today I was officially an adult. As I padded into the kitchen, the sight stopped me short. My father stood by the stove, a crisp white shirt rolled up at the sleeves, his dark hair slightly messy yet somehow fitting. The table was set with an elegance I'd never seen before, 2 plates, freshly polished silverware, and a vase holding the largest bouquet of crimson roses I'd ever seen. "Morning, birthday girl," he said, turning toward me with a smile that softened his sharp features. His eyes lit up when they met mine, and for a moment I saw something unfamiliar there, a quiet pride perhaps, or maybe just the weight of 18 years flashing through his mind. "Dad, what is all this?" I asked, though the grin on my face betrayed my delight. "Breakfast," he said simply, as if it wasn't the most thoughtful thing he'd done in ages. "You're 18 now, and that calls for something special." I walked closer, taking in the delicious aroma of fresh pancakes and syrup. "You didn't have to do all this, ugh." His brow furrowed, playful but firm. "Of course I did. My little girl isn't so little anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He didn't dwell on them, though, instead motioning for me to sit. As I did, he disappeared into the hallway for a moment, returning with something wrapped in a silver ribbon. He placed it in front of me, stepping back as if to observe my reaction. "What's this?" I asked, my hands hovering over the gift. "Open it," he urged, his voice quieter now, almost tender. I untied the ribbon carefully, letting it fall away as I opened the box. Inside was the most stunning dress I'd ever seen, a deep, vibrant red that seemed to shimmer in the light. My fingers grazed the fabric, soft and smooth, and my heart swelled with surprise. "Dad," I breathed, looking up at him. "You deserve something beautiful," he said, his voice steady but his expression unguarded, raw in a way I hadn't seen before. "Something as stunning as you are." Compliment caught me off guard, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. His words were kind, yet there was a depth to them that left me unsure how to respond. "Thank you," I said, standing to give him a hug. His arms wrapped around me with a warmth that was familiar yet, in that moment, felt heavier somehow. "Try it on," he suggested, stepping back with a soft smile. I nodded, retreating to my room to slip into the dress. Fit perfectly, hugging my figure in a way that made me feel both confident and self-conscious. When I reappeared, his reaction was immediate. His gaze swept over me, and he smiled, a blend of pride and something else I couldn't quite name. "You look," He paused, as if searching for the right word. Beautiful, I twirled, laughing softly, trying to shake off the strange new energy that lingered between us. It's perfect, I said, and I meant it. The rest of the morning unfolded like a dream. Breakfast was delicious, pancakes, fresh fruit, and coffee sweetened just the way I liked it. My father was attentive in a way that felt more intentional than usual, complimenting me often and making sure I had everything I needed. At one point, he reached across the table to brush a stray strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering for just a moment. The gesture was so gentle, so careful that I didn't pull away. Instead, I met his eyes, seeing something there I couldn't quite decipher. "You've grown up so fast," he said softly, almost to himself. 18 years isn't that fast, I replied, trying to lighten the mood. He chuckled, though his smile remained bittersweet. "It feels like yesterday you were running around in pigtails, dragging that stuffed bunny everywhere you went." I laughed too, recalling the memory. "Benny the bunny," I said. "You hated that thing." "I didn't hate it," he corrected, shaking his head. "I just hated how I couldn't wash it without you crying." The conversation drifted into stories of my childhood, moments I'd half forgotten but that he remembered with startling clarity. Each memory he shared felt like a gift, a reminder of how deeply he'd been present in every stage of my life. But beneath the laughter and nostalgia, there was an unspoken shift. He treated me not just as his daughter but as someone entirely grown, a woman. It was in the way his compliments lingered, the way his hands brushed mine when he passed the syrup, the way his gaze softened whenever I spoke. As the day stretched on, I felt the weight of his attention more keenly. When I stood to clear the table, his hand rested lightly on my shoulder, stopping me. "Let me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. I smiled, stepping aside. "Thank you, Dad. For everything." "You don't have to thank me," he said, meeting my eyes with a sincerity that made my heart ache. "I just want you to be happy. Always." The day wasn't over, but it already felt like the most special birthday I'd ever had. And though I couldn't quite put it into words, I sensed that this birthday wasn't just a milestone for me, it was one for him too. The rest of the morning felt surreal, filled with a warmth I hadn't experienced in such a profound way before. My father hovered near me, his every action brimming with an attentiveness that made me feel treasured. As we sat in the living room, sipping tea he'd prepared, he turned to me with a smile that softened his sharp features. You remind me so much of your mother," he said, his voice tender, almost wistful. I paused, my cup halfway to my lips. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but today the words felt different, heavier somehow. "Really?" I asked, setting the cup down and meeting his gaze. He nodded. "Just as beautiful, just as kind." His eyes softened, and his voice grew quieter. "She would be so proud of you, the young woman you've become." A warmth spread through me, and I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "That means a lot, Dad." "Thank you." Compliment lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. I loved hearing about my mother, even if the memories were tinged with a bittersweet ache. I didn't remember much about her. I was so young when we lost her. But the way my father spoke of her made me feel connected to her in ways words couldn't fully express. He continued, his tone turning lighter, "today is your day. How would you like to spend it?" I tilted my head, considering the question. "I don't know. This morning has been so perfect, I haven't thought about anything else." "Well," he said, leaning back and crossing his arms with a playful grin, "I might have taken the liberty of planning a little something for this evening, if you don't mind." "Oh?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "What kind of something?" He smiled, his expression a blend of excitement and nervousness. "I made a reservation at a nice restaurant. It's nothing too fancy, but I thought it would be special. Of course, only if you're up for it." The idea of an evening out, just the two of us, filled me with anticipation. "I'd love that," I said earnestly. "Good," he replied, his smile widening. "And I'd like you to wear the dress I gave you." "If that's okay." I nodded, my heart fluttering at the thought of the effort he'd put into making this day so memorable. "It's more than okay, Dad." "Thank you." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of quiet moments and unspoken emotions. We spent the afternoon together, reminiscing and laughing over shared memories. It was as if the world outside had melted away, leaving just the two of us in this bubble of connection and warmth. As evening approached, I slipped into the red dress, its fabric hugging me like it was made for me, which in a way it was. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps and smoothing the skirt, my reflection catching me off guard. I looked different, older, more poised. When I emerged from my room, my father was waiting in the living room, adjusting the collar of his dark blazer. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, and for a moment his expression froze. "You," he started, his voice trailing off as his eyes swept over me. "You look stunning." Heat rose to my cheeks, and I glanced down, smoothing the fabric nervously. "Thank you, Dad." "No," he said, stepping closer. "Really? You look perfect." The sincerity in his voice made my heart swell, and I couldn't help but smile. "You clean up pretty well yourself," I teased, trying to lighten the moment. He chuckled, reaching out to offer his arm. "Shall we?" The restaurant was every bit as charming as he'd described. Soft lighting bathed the room in a warm glow, and the quiet hum of conversation created an atmosphere of intimacy and elegance. He'd reserved a table by the window where we could look out at the city lights twinkling like stars. As we settled into our seats, he reached across the table, taking my hand gently in his. "Thank you for letting me plan this," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a depth that made my breath hitch. "Thank you for everything," I replied, squeezing his hand. "This is the best birthday I could have imagined." The evening unfolded like something out of a dream. The food was delicious, the conversation easy and filled with laughter. He told stories about my mother, about their early days together, and each one painted a vivid picture of the love they'd shared. "She had this way of lighting up a room," he said, his voice soft. "Just like you." I felt my cheeks flush again, but this time it wasn't from shyness. It was a warmth that spread from deep within, a feeling of being seen and cherished. As the night wore on, the unspoken closeness between us grew. He was attentive in a way that felt both familiar and new, pulling out my chair, pouring my water, and making sure I was comfortable. It was as if he wanted to make every moment count, to etch this day into both our memories. When we finally returned home, the house was quiet, and the day's events lingered in the air like the soft glow of candlelight. "Dad," I said as we stood by the door, "this was the best birthday I've ever had." He smiled, his eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. "I'm glad. You deserve it." I leaned in to hug him, and he held me close, his embrace steady and warm. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence saying more than words ever could. "Happy birthday," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Thank you," I replied, my own voice trembling with emotion. As I stepped back, our eyes met, and I realized that today wasn't just a celebration of my birthday. It was a celebration of the bond we'd built and the love that had carried us through so many years. The evening felt like a dream I didn't want to wake from. The warmth of the restaurant still lingered in my heart as we stepped back into the house, the soft click of the door behind us grounding me in the moment. My father, or perhaps I should call him something else now, was unusually quiet as he set his keys on the counter, his movements deliberate, as though he were lost in thought. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a pause, his voice softer than usual. "Of course," I replied, curious. He turned to me, his expression gentle but thoughtful. "Tonight, just for tonight, would you call me by my name?" I blinked, taken aback. "You mean?" "Yes," he interrupted, almost shyly. "Just Ethan." "Not Dad." I hesitated, trying to process the request. It felt strange, almost forbidden, yet the way he looked at me, so earnest, so vulnerable, made it impossible to say no. "Okay. Ethan," I said tentatively, testing the name on my tongue. Felt foreign yet oddly fitting in the moment. His smile was small but genuine, as though I'd given him a gift he hadn't expected. "Thank you," he said quietly. I wanted to ask him why, but the moment didn't feel like it needed questions. Instead, I let the silence settle around us, warm and unspoken. As I started toward my room to change out of the dress, he stopped me with a gentle hand on my arm. "Wait," he said, his tone light but purposeful. "I want to take a picture of you." "A picture?" I asked, caught off guard. He nodded, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "You look stunning tonight, and I want to capture that. You know, I used to take so many pictures of your mother. She always said they were her favorite because they weren't for anyone else, just for us." His words brought a pang of bittersweet emotion, but there was something about the way he said them that made me feel special. "Okay," I agreed, smiling. "Where do you want me?" "Wait here," he said, disappearing into the living room. I followed after a moment, curious, and found him adjusting a small lamp with a warm, golden light. He turned off the overhead lights, leaving the room bathed in a soft glow. "Perfect," he murmured, stepping back to survey his work. "Stand here, by the window." I did as he asked, feeling the smooth fabric of the red dress against my skin as I moved. The light from the lamp highlighted the color in a way that made it look richer, deeper. He raised his camera, an old one I hadn't seen him use in years. "Just relax," he said, his voice soothing. "You don't have to pose. Just be yourself." I laughed softly, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. "Easier said than done." "You're doing great already," he said, snapping the first photo. His words were steady and calm, like a painter complimenting his canvas. "Tilt your head a little, yes, just like that." "You're beautiful." Heat rose to my cheeks at the compliment, but I followed his instructions, feeling both self-conscious and flattered. As the camera clicked, he offered more soft praise. "That smile suits you," he said at one point. "You have the same spark your mother had, it's mesmerizing." His words wrapped around me, filling the room with an intimacy I hadn't expected. For a moment, I felt like I was seeing myself through his eyes, not just as his daughter, but as someone radiant and worth celebrating. When he lowered the camera, his expression was unreadable for a moment, then softened into something I could only describe as pride. "I think that's enough," he said, setting the camera down gently. "But you were perfect." I laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "I'm not sure I've ever been called perfect before." "You are to me," he said simply, stepping closer. His voice held no hesitation, just a quiet truth that made my heart ache in the best way. He reached out, pulling me into a hug. His arms around me felt stronger than usual, the embrace lasting longer than it might have on any other day. I rested my head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my cheek. "You've grown into an amazing woman," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight I couldn't quite name. "Your mother would be so proud." "Thank you," I whispered, my voice catching. He leaned back just slightly, enough to look at me, and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. It wasn't unusual for him to show affection, but tonight the gesture felt deeper, like it carried everything he couldn't say in words. As he pulled away, his hand lingered on my shoulder for a moment before he stepped back entirely. "I'll make us some tea," he said, his tone returning to its usual warmth. "Why don't you change into something comfortable?" I nodded, my heart still fluttering from the intensity of the moment. "Okay," I said, giving him a small smile before retreating to my room. As I slipped out of the dress and into my favorite sweater, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair was slightly tousled, my cheeks still flushed, and my eyes held a brightness I hadn't seen in a long time. I looked different. I couldn't quite put it into words, but something between us had shifted that night, something unspoken but undeniably real. And as I made my way back to the kitchen, the warmth of it lingered in my chest like the golden glow of the lamp that still lit the living room. The air felt different as I walked back into the living room, still glowing with the soft, warm light Ethan had set up earlier. He stood at the counter, preparing tea with a quiet focus that somehow made the moment feel even more intimate. It was hard to reconcile how much had changed between us in the course of just one evening. When he glanced up and saw me, his expression softened. I was just about to bring this to you, he said, holding up 2 steaming mugs. I smiled, walking over to him. I'm not used to all this attention, I admitted with a quiet laugh. You deserve it, he said simply, handing me one of the mugs. His voice was calm, but the way his eyes lingered on me spoke volumes. We moved to the couch, the room now bathed in a peaceful stillness. The warmth of the tea and the soft hum of the evening made everything feel almost surreal. As we sipped in comfortable silence, I found myself stealing glances at him, studying the way the light caught the lines of his face. He looked tired, but in a way that carried a sense of peace, as if this evening had meant as much to him as it had to me. I have something to say, he said suddenly, setting his mug down on the table and turning to face me fully. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated for a moment, his hands resting on his knees as he searched for the right words. Tonight has been special. Not just because it's your birthday, but because... He trailed off, exhaling softly. Because I've realized how much I've missed moments like this. Me too, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. It's been a long time since we've been this close. He nodded, his gaze intense but gentle. You remind me so much of your mother, he said again, but this time his voice carried a deeper emotion. Not just in the way you look, but in the way you make everything feel brighter, warmer. She had that same light, and you've carried it on in ways I don't think you even realize. The lump in my throat grew, and I set my mug down, suddenly overwhelmed. Ethan, I began, but I didn't know how to finish. I know this might sound strange, he continued, leaning slightly closer, but tonight, seeing you, hearing you laugh, watching you in that dress, it's like I've seen you for the first time. Not just as my daughter, but as this incredible, beautiful woman. My breath hitched at his words, and for a moment all I could do was stare at him, my heart racing. There was something in his eyes, something raw and unguarded, that made it impossible to look away. I hope I haven't said too much, he added, his voice quieter now. No, I said quickly, shaking my head. It's just a lot to take in. He gave me a small smile, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. Touch was so gentle, so deliberate that I found myself leaning into it without thinking. You're everything to me, he said softly. You always have been. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. His lips brushed mine, soft and hesitant, as if testing the waters. The world seemed to stop in that moment. The warmth of his kiss, the way his hand cupped my face, the unspoken emotions that passed between us, it was overwhelming and unfamiliar, yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When he finally pulled back, his eyes searched mine, filled with both vulnerability and uncertainty. I'm sorry, he whispered. I shouldn't have. I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. No, I said, my voice trembling. Don't apologize. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between us. I didn't know what it meant or where we would go from here, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tonight had changed everything.